The gavel struck 3 times, each crack echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. Judge Warren Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he surveyed the young, black woman standing before him. She couldn't have been more than 19. Dressed in an oversized sweater and worn jeans, her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. To him, she looked exactly like what he expected, another troubled youth, wasting the court's precious time. "So, miss?" He glanced down at his papers with exaggerated disinterest. "Robinson. Here for a traffic violation, I see. Let me guess. You were probably on your phone, weren't you? Or maybe racing to some party." Keisha Robinson stood perfectly still, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "No, Your Honor, I wasn't finished speaking," Judge Mitchell interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the bench. "You know, I see kids like you come through here every single day. Same story, different face. No respect for authority, no sense of responsibility. And here you are, can't even afford proper court attire. What does that tell me about how seriously you're taking these proceedings?" In the gallery, a few spectators shifted uncomfortably. The court reporter's fingers hesitated over her keys. Even the bailiff, a veteran of 15 years, felt his jaw tighten at the judge's tone. But Judge Mitchell was just getting started. "Where are your parents? Let me guess. Father's not in the picture?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "It's always the same pattern. No guidance, no discipline, and then society has to deal with the consequences." Keisha's hands, which had been loosely clasped in front of her, tightened almost imperceptibly. But her voice remained steady. "Your Honor, if I could explain the circumstances—" "Oh, I'm sure you have plenty of excuses." The judge cut her off again. "That's all I hear from people who stand where you're standing." "It wasn't my fault, Judge. I didn't mean to." "Judge, if you just understood my situation." "Judge," he waved his hand dismissively. "Tell me, Miss Robinson, why should this court show you any mercy when you clearly show no respect for the law?" The public defender assigned to Keisha's case stood up, his face flushed. "Your Honor, I must object to this line of—" "Sit down, counselor. I'll decide what's appropriate in my courtroom." What Judge Warren Mitchell didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the young woman standing before him wasn't actually a defendant at all. Keisha Robinson was a 26-year-old attorney, a graduate of Yale Law School, and more importantly, an undercover inspector for the State Bar, Association's Judicial Conduct Review Board. For 6 months, she had been visiting courtrooms across the state, posing as a defendant to evaluate whether judges treated all people fairly, regardless of race, age, or economic status. And Judge Mitchell was failing spectacularly. "I'm going to do you a favor," the judge continued, his tone now adopting a mock paternal quality that made Keisha's skin crawl. "I'm going to give you a lecture you probably never got at home. Life isn't about taking shortcuts. It's about following rules. Rules that people like me, educated, disciplined people, have put in place to keep society functioning. When you break those rules, there are consequences. Do you understand what I'm saying? Or do I need to use smaller words?" An elderly black woman in the second row stood up abruptly and walked out, her footsteps loud in the silent courtroom. Judge Mitchell didn't even glance in her direction. Keisha took a slow breath. She had sat through bias training at the Bar Association. She had studied the psychological profiles of judges who let prejudice cloud their judgment. She had even practiced keeping her composure in role-playing exercises. But nothing had quite prepared her for the casual cruelty, the almost gleeful condescension in Judge Mitchell's voice. This wasn't just bias, this was contempt. "Now about your fine," Judge Mitchell said, consulting his papers. "The standard fine for this violation is $200. But given your apparent circumstances," he looked pointedly at her clothing again, "and your attitude in my courtroom, I'm going to increase that to $500. Maybe a little financial pain will teach you the lesson your parents obviously didn't." "Your Honor," Keisha finally spoke, her voice carrying a new edge. "Before you finalize that judgment, there's something I need to tell you." "Oh, now you want to talk?" "It's too late for—" "I'm not who you think I am." Keisha reached into her bag, and the bailiff instinctively stepped forward. But she calmly pulled out a leather credential wallet. "My name is Keisha Robinson, and I'm an attorney with the State Bar Association. For the past 6 months, I've been conducting undercover evaluations of judicial conduct in courtrooms across the state. The color drained from Judge Mitchell's face. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The smirk had vanished, replaced by something that looked like pure panic. This entire proceeding has been recorded, Keisha continued, her voice now professional and measured. Audio and video. Every word you've said, every assumption you've made, every stereotype you've invoked, all documented. The traffic violation you were supposedly adjudicating? Completely fabricated. The file on your desk? Planted by our team with the cooperation of the court administrator. The courtroom had erupted into whispers. The public defender was staring open-mouthed. The bailiff had actually taken a step back, as if distance might somehow separate him from the unfolding disaster. You can't, Judge Mitchell stammered. His hands, which had been so confidently folded moments before, now gripped the edge of the bench as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. I can and I have, Keisha said. She pulled out a small recording device from her bag and placed it on the defendant's table. The State Bar Association takes judicial bias very seriously. Your Honor, or should I say, Mr. Mitchell, because after my report is filed with the Judicial Review Board, I doubt you'll be wearing that robe much longer. For 15 years, Warren Mitchell had sat on that bench. He had heard thousands of cases, rendered thousands of judgments. He had always thought of himself as fair, as colorblind as someone who called it like he saw it. But in that moment, forced to hear his own words echoed back to him through Keisha's measured recitation of his worst comments, he finally heard what everyone else had heard. The bias, the prejudice, the ugly assumptions he'd been making for years without ever examining them. I have 12 other evaluations to complete this month, Keisha said, packing up her materials. Judges in different counties, different demographics, different courtrooms. You're the 7th judge I've tested, Judge Mitchell, and I'm sorry to say, you're the 3rd to fail this badly. She paused at the courtroom door, turning back one last time. The tragedy is that you have the power to change people's lives. You could use that power to show mercy, to understand complexity, to see the humanity in every person who stands before you. Instead, you chose to see stereotypes and caricatures. You chose contempt over compassion. That's not justice. That's just cruelty with a gavel. 6 months later, Warren Mitchell's name appeared in the State Bar disciplinary reports. He was suspended from the bench for 2 years, required to complete extensive bias training, and ordered to perform 1,000 hours of community service in predominantly black neighborhoods. Some said the punishment was too harsh. Others said it wasn't nearly enough. But something unexpected happened during those 2 years. Working in community centers, tutoring kids who looked like the young woman he'd mocked in his courtroom, listening to stories of people whose lives had been shaped by the kind of casual prejudice he'd wielded like a weapon, Warren Mitchell began to change. It wasn't a dramatic conversion, wasn't a single moment of clarity. It was slow, painful, humbling work. When he finally returned to the bench, he was a different kind of judge. He still held people accountable, still upheld the law, but he did it with the understanding that every person before him was exactly that, a person, with a story, with struggles, with dignity that deserved respect regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. And Keisha Robinson? She continued her work, traveling from courtroom to courtroom, a guardian angel in disguise, testing whether the scales of justice truly balanced evenly for everyone or whether they needed someone brave enough to point out when they didn't.